This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. And this week, Jonathan Bennett and I talked to Matt Mullenweg, the co-founder and alpha dude at WordPress, which is what he calls on the show the dark matter of the web. Like 40% of all of the websites on the web, some large percentage, are WordPress sites. And there are all kinds of other things he's doing I hadn't heard of before, like Openverse. I had to look at it. Openverse. It's very cool. It's a way to search through images in the open source world. What he's doing with Tumblr, which they picked up, which is doing things I didn't know they were doing. Plus, the way they're doing open source, how they got to be gigantic while nobody noticed in a way, and are not part of the way we talk about gigantic companies. They're huge, and yet very modest about it. And I really love this show. Matt told us all kinds of new and interesting stuff. So that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 671, recorded Wednesday, March 9th, 2022. WordPress Evolutions. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden. Get the password manager that offers a robust and cost-effective solution that can drastically increase your chances of staying safe online. Get started with a free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. And by Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics, big, small, and strange. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And by New Relic. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does, and you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free per month forever, no credit card required. Sign up at newrelic.com/floss. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly. Welcome wherever you are, whatever time it is. A little bit of a late start on today's show, so we're going to get right into it. Here's Jonathan Bennett, who will banter as briefly as we can before this starts. We have a very special guest today, is Matt Mullenweg of WordPress Flame and not flaming, unless it's only going upward, and much else. So obviously you're familiar with WordPress, and there are other things I didn't know that they were doing. So.
I host WordPress sites. I actually work for a company, Hackaday, that's hosted on a WordPress site. I have lots of little tendrils connecting me off to WordPress in various ways.
Yeah, there's oh my gosh, I have so many tabs open. There's a bunch of things that they're doing. Oh my gosh, and his people have sent me a whole bunch of things. I'm really in a hurry to get this thing going. So let me get the right tab in front of me now and let all of you know that that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the only open source cross-platform password manager that can be used at home, at work, or on the go, and is trusted by millions. With Bitwarden, you can securely store credentials across personal and business worlds. Every Bitwarden account begins with the creation of a personal vault. So you can use Bitwarden for your business. It's fully customizable. Adjust features using enterprise policies to adapt to your business needs. Use Bitwarden Send, a fully encrypted method to transmit sensitive information, whether text or files. Team members can generate unique and secure passwords for every site. You'll get enterprise-grade security, and their GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, and SOC 2 compliant. Their end-to-end encrypted vault helps mitigate phishing attacks by storing passwords and more. Bitwarden recently announced that they have taken the first steps on two major initiatives. First, the icons within the app have been updated, heralding a coming update to the user interface. Second, the ability to switch accounts has been added to the desktop application. Easily switch between multiple Bitwarden accounts, such as your personal and work accounts, using a drop-down list without having to log out and back in again. This provides convenient access to vault items from either account and allows you to maintain separation of personal and work vault items. Account switching will be rolled out to other platforms soon. Interested in a business plan? Their Teams organization option is $3 a month per user, where you can share private data securely with your coworkers, department, or entire organization. For enterprises, use Bitwarden's Enterprise Organization Plan for just $5 a month per user. Bitwarden believes that everyone should have access to basic password and security tools. Individuals can use their basic free account forever for an unlimited number of passwords, or upgrade at any time to their premium account for less than $1 a month. And if you're looking for secure password storage for your entire family, their family organization option gives up to 6 users premium features for only $3.33 a month. Using Bitwarden Cloud, you can get started in no time, monitor and manage security vulnerabilities using Bitwarden Vault Health Reports, identify exposed, reused, weak, or potentially compromised passwords, as well as any items in your vault with inactive 2FA. There's been recent news about a popular password manager suffering from credential stuffing attack. Credential stuffing is a known and unfortunately common attack whereby hackers attempt to use usernames and passwords that they find on the dark web to log into other websites. This serves as a reminder that it is always important to use different passwords on every website you visit, and when using a password manager, to create a strong and unique password only for your password manager, not used anywhere else. At TWiT, we're fans of password managers. Bitwarden is the only open source cross-platform password manager that can be used at home, on the go, or at work, and is trusted by millions of individuals, teams, and organizations worldwide. Get started with a free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. That's bitwarden.com/twit. So, okay, let me get all my windows reorganized here, and try not to lose the one I just lost, and I did again. So I am going to wing this part. Really special guest today, Matt Mullenweg. I've known Matt maybe since the last millennium. I'm not sure, close to that. From when I was in one of the alpha early bloggers, back when blogging was a thing. And I remember when Movable Type was like the big platform, and then they closed themselves up, went closed source, and I think under Matt's leadership, almost immediately WordPress took over. A third of the world's websites now run on WordPress, and Matt is a VC among other things, and to running WordPress. In any case, that's an inadequate introduction, Matt, and I'm really sorry. I can't keep too many windows open at once. How are you, man?
No worries. I'm doing great, and thanks for having me.
So let's start with the history here, because, and I'm wondering in a way, were you surprised by the success of WordPress at first, or did Movable Type just do you a gigantic favor and change the world in the process? It's a really great A/B thing there, because closing source turned out to be like one of the most monstrously horrible mistakes I think any company has ever made. And I don't know if you think of it that way, but wonder what your history looks like from your angle at this point.
What was interesting is Movable Type was never open source, but they did. It was Perl code, and you could see it and modify it. So it was a proprietary license, but with source available. And what they changed wasn't the availability of the source or anything, but they changed their pricing. So they did an upgrade. I think it was version 3.0 for them. And the price went up a lot for a lot of people. And they didn't really add a ton of features in that version, and the upgrading was kind of a pain. So that was the trifecta that I think caused some people to, we tried to make it really easy to switch to WordPress. So some people were like, I'm just going to switch to WordPress instead of upgrade Movable Type. And that was definitely a very early pivot point for us. So thank you. They were around for many years. They were still a competitor for many years. They bought LiveJournal. They ran Vox and TypePad. And it was kind of the Goliath to our David, because when we were like 3 or 4 people, they were over 200 people. had Joy Ito on the board, Reid Hoffman, August Capital. Six Part was a big company.
Yeah, and Loic Lemure was there. I remember talking to him when they went, I guess, with the new pricing model. It's been a long time. It's hard to remember, but was WordPress laying around as code, or did you guys work on it before that happened? What was the origin story for the WordPress code itself?
Yeah, so I actually used to use Movable Type myself, and I wanted something that was built on PHP and more hackable, like easier to modify. And so I found an open source project called B2 Cafe Log. It was from a guy named Michel in Corsica, France. And I just became a volunteer, started helping out on the forums, contributing code. It's kind of the first open source project I really got involved with as a contributor. Michel disappeared and development of B2 stopped. And there were probably, I think, 6 forks of the software. So 6 people who picked it up, or 6 different projects that picked it up. I partnered with a gentleman named Mike Little, who I knew from also being a volunteer on B2, but we had never met in person. And we started the fork that we called WordPress. And I reached out to a bunch of the other forks, and all except one actually joined up. So we just all started working together. And that was the initial developers of WordPress as well. Myself and these other fork developers, like Donna Oakweave, Mike Little, Alex King. It was really fun. It still is really fun.
Hey, Matt, I want to jump in. I was going to ask about your choice of license, why you went with the GPL, but it sounds like if this was essentially a fork, and then you guys kind of became the heir apparent. You sort of inherited the license, didn't you? You were, for lack of a better term, you were stuck with the GPL, right?
We did, but we've done a lot to. I've done a lot of things since then that have also been GPL, and we've fought a lot for the GPL within the WordPress ecosystem. So it's definitely a license that I feel strongly about and consider myself a strong advocate for. I think we've used it for everything major we've done, including Gutenberg, but Gutenberg we are going to dual license under a more permissive license, probably MIT, to allow it to be embedded in mobile apps easier.
So the direction I was going to go with that is because WordPress runs primarily on the server, not on the client's machines. There's this kind of a loophole with the GPL, and you've got the AGPL, the Affero GNU Public License, that's kind of designed to plug that loophole. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that, and whether that was ever considered as an option for WordPress, or honestly, I'm not sure exactly how the licensing would work with that, if you could change the license with copyright and all of that. I'm just curious your thoughts on it.
I'm not an expert on the Affero GPL. What I would say is that the loophole isn't a bad one, and it hasn't really come up that much. And it also allows for people to, for example, have like private code on their site or a private theme that's just unique to them. So it's I don't think it's a bad thing. And in practice, we just try to make the incentives for collaborating and sharing code stronger than keeping it proprietary. So there's now tons of businesses built on top of WordPress. At this point, probably billions of dollars of activity going through the WordPress ecosystem. And all of them are GPL, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I call it a loophole. That was just a good way to introduce it. What it actually does is it makes the GPL into more of a permissive license. So if the code is only running on the server side, then it really begins to approach similar to what the MIT license or the BSD, the more permissive licenses. They kind of begin to, in practice, resemble each other, which is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that you've used the GPL license for a lot of things. Have those primarily all been kind of the same server side? And I guess I'm curious, if you were to go off and start a project that, just because of the way it runs, it doesn't fall under this loophole, would you go with a more permissive license, or would you stick with the GPL?
Yeah, where one thing we've run into is, for example, we've created this new editor called Gutenberg, which is a block-based editor. It really transforms what you can do within WordPress, but we also designed it to be used by other CMSs because we'd like this to be a cross-CMS standard. One thing we ran into was that it was not possible for people to embed this in mobile apps because of the way mobile apps are distributed. It would trigger the GPL, and they would need to open source their entire app, which is fine for some, although there's not a ton of open source mobile apps. Ours is open source. We have a few. But for others, that might not be appropriate. So that's part of why we're dual licensing Gutenberg. Would I use GPL even if it applied to other things? Yeah. Like we have a number of mobile apps, so some of which were acquisitions, so they're not open source yet, but we're planning to open source basically everything. And that's Day One, which is an encrypted journaling system. Pocket Cast, which is the best podcasting app. If you haven't tried it, please try it. And we have Simple Notes, we have Tumblr, we have WordPress. So we've got a lot going on the web. On mobile.
And so your funding model for at least most of these, for WordPress certainly, has been paid support and paid hosting. Is that how WordPress has made its fortune, so to speak?
Yeah, actually, WordPress, the core open source project, and the .org hasn't really ever had a funding model. We did some donations early on, but it was never a ton. We ran some ads, but right now it's just something, all the infrastructure and stuff is I pay for personally. And no one gets paid by the foundation or anything. It has no employees. It's just basically an IP holding entity. So what happened was a few years after WordPress started, I started a for-profit company called Automattic. And that was to create commercial services around WordPress, including WordPress.com. We got that domain, and so that's a hosted version of WordPress. And that's been, basically the idea was we'd sell some stuff around WordPress, and that would hopefully give us enough money to work on it full-time. And now Automattic is just about 2,000 people. We've been, like an open source project, we've been fully distributed from the very start. So that's across 93 countries, actually. And I'm really proud of what the team's created. We contribute a lot to WordPress, but when the major release of WordPress comes out, Automattic contributors, like people employed by my company, are only about 10% of the contributors. So the WordPress ecosystem is much, much, much bigger than Automattic. And I think that's really important.
I have a question. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, let me tie this a little bit up, and then I'll hit it back over to you. So I'm in thinking about this. I write for Hackaday, and Hackaday is a WordPress website, but it's hosted by WordPress VIP, which I was thinking might be you guys, but that's actually one of your competitors, isn't it? And it's kind of interesting that you have this sort of cooperative / competitive relationship with a whole bunch of other companies around WordPress.
Yeah, VIP is actually us. So that's our enterprise arm. That's doing, it was slow to start, but doing really well now. Hackaday was pretty early. Was that Jason Calacanis? Is that one of his things? Or am I remembering that incorrectly?
That name sounds familiar. Oh goodness, you've got me stuck on who started all of it. It's Supply Frame is the parent company right now, but there's a lot of history that I would have to go look up the details. But anyway, I'm still curious about digging into that idea of cooperation and competition because there are other WordPress hosting companies out there, of course.
Yeah, one that people confuse with us a lot is WP Engine. So that is a competitor to our services. But there's a lot of good ones. You can get WordPress from GoDaddy, Bluehost, any of the cloud providers, WP Engine, or us. So we compete in the open market. You really have to have since WordPress itself is a commodity, you really have to have a strong differentiator on top of it. And for us, that tries to be performance, security, and support.
I want to drill down a little bit further on the distributed workforce thing. Sure. It's really interesting to me that you had a distributed population of contributors to WordPress itself, and then you became a distributed company. And you blogged a bit about this recently. And you did a video on this that I watched, where you're advocating, not locating necessarily in all the tech hubs in the world, or in Silicon Valley or other expensive places, but people working wherever they feel comfortable. And I'm wondering, I think we can all see the virtues in that, especially for a company that's inherently virtualized and working on a tech product. But I'm wondering how the pandemic has affected that. Has it accelerated that? Has it pushed the whole topic forward a bit? I'm just curious to know what changes, if any, happened to your company or that you see coming for the world.
I mean, undoubtedly, the pandemic accelerated it. I think everyone who could started working from home. And that was great because, it was great in the sense that people saw it was possible. There's still companies who want people to return to offices and things, and we'll see how that goes. But people have had a taste of this freedom and how powerful it can be to have more autonomy and control over your day. Now, of course, the pandemic itself was horrible. We were definitely affected. I would say the biggest thing was people who worked from home, might have worked from home alone. And so they might not have had partners or spouses or roommates there. And then, of course, everything around education and childcare for my colleagues who have kids, was, a huge disruption. And a lot of people had to take a lot more time off, or they were less productive or distracted during the day, or, they might move to 4 or 3 day work weeks just because of the additional burdens.
I'm wondering, and this may be an unanswerable question, and we go out of our way to avoid politics as well as profanity here, but there's a war going on right now, and there are developers everywhere, and I'm wondering to what extent it's affected what you guys are doing.
Yeah, at Automattic, I have 9 colleagues in Ukraine and 11 in Russia, and this is completely unprecedented for us, at least, to have someone we work alongside every day say they have to log off because there's rockets. So very scary. As a company, we're offering whatever we can to these impacted folks. But I can't say that I know what the right answers are or even really what to do. We're just taking it day by day and staying in close contact to hear what those people need.
Yeah, that's got to be a tough one because you're selling products there too. There's, I suppose, in the plural. Let me jump to another topic, which is a big one for me because it's what the hell happened to blogging. I mean, so I was the one and only time I met Robin Williams was purely by accident, and somebody introduced me saying, Doc, is like in 2003 or something. Doc here is one of the top 15 bloggers, and I said, no, I'm probably below that, but most of the ones above me are duplicates. And I got into this banter with Robin, which was like where I'm just outside of myself saying, holy crap, I'm actually like riffing with Robin Williams. What's this about? That's so cool. But anyway, at that time I had like 50,000 readers a day. I had like a daily paper that I wrote. And social media came along, and obviously that's what happened to blogging. And it went down to dozens. And that's where it is now. On, by the way, 4 different WordPress blogs, including ones at Harvard that are stuck at 4.8.1, which I am bothered by. But yeah, I know.
We should get somebody connect me to whoever's running that.
Yeah, I know. I want to make a connection here because we need to fix this. But I'm wondering what it's kind of like. I'm wondering. I mean, for me, it's like, is there hope for like the individual publisher anymore? And you've got a third of all of them in the world, but how many of them are like the old-fashioned bloggers? I'm wondering both what happened to it, and is there hope for what we had? I'm the solo publisher, basically, of what I'm doing.
Totally. What happened to it? I think that it was, a combination of things, including Google killing Google Reader, which was a popular RSS reader, and the browsers, for privacy reasons, blocking cross-site cookies and things like that. So that made it impossible for us to like auto-log you into every site to provide social features across domains. I think that algorithms on Facebook started linking out more. They really started rewarding content that was posted directly. And then on Twitter, it's just easy. You can reply, you can have a conversation. It's fun. It's all integrated. Now, that said, there are more blogs than there ever were. They're getting more traffic than they ever have. And, we run two services, WordPress.com and Tumblr, that have incredibly vibrant activity. And if you could believe it, Tumblr, over half the users are 13 to 24. So these are young people blogging millions and millions of times per day and getting a ton of traffic. So, I think blogging is very different. And the blogs that were popular in 2003, very few of them are still going or are still popular today. There are a few, like, Dave Weiner, Anil Dash, Cocktail, Daring Fireball, My Site, it may not TT.
Yeah, right.
So some of them are still going, but I think what's so cool is that social networks have become so toxic to many that people are looking for alternatives. That's part of why we're doing Tumblr. We want to create a social network with a different business model and a different kind of community model. But if you blog today, by the way, what people do on Substack is blogging, or Medium. That's blogging too. Those are also popular.
Yeah.
If you blog today, you have to do a little more work to get distribution. So you want to get people signing up for an email newsletter. You can start a Telegram group to post things. You can, of course, cross-post it to your social networks, post it as an Instagram story. Like, there's things you can do to let people know you have a new blog post. And people visit them. Phones are everywhere. People are reading more than ever. And modern blogging systems like WordPress are ultra fast. So it's not bad. In fact, it's quite a lot of fun.
It is. I have never stopped because I can't, but it's just too much by nature. And I know Jonathan has a question, but first I have to let everybody know that the FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat discussing tech topics, big, small, and strange. Compiler comes to you from the makers of Command Line Heroes, another of our sponsors, and is hosted by Angela Andrews and Brent Simoneau. Technology can be big, bold, bizarre, and complicated. Compiler unravels industry topics, trends, and the things you've always wanted to know about tech through interviews with the people who know it best. On their show, you will hear a chorus of perspectives from the diverse communities behind the code. Compiler brings together a curious team of Red Hatters to tackle big questions in tech, like what is technical debt? What are tech hiring managers actually looking for? And do you have to know how to code to get started in open source? Episode 2 covers what can video games teach us about edge computing. The internet is a patchwork of international agreements and varying infrastructure, but there's something coming to change the ways we connect. In this episode of Compiler, hosts explore what edge computing could mean for people who enjoy video games and what this form of entertainment can teach us about the technology. Episode 9, how are tech hubs changing? Traditionally, if someone wanted a career in tech, they had to make the move to a tech hub, a city packed with startups and talent. But things are starting to change. The hosts of Compiler speak to a few of the change makers who are thinking outside the physical and social dimensions we've come to associate with innovation. And in fact, today's episode is at least partly about that because it's the success story of exactly that. So learn more about Compiler at red.ht/twit. New episodes are out now. Go and download them at any time and be sure to check back for new shows. Listen to Compiler on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll also include a link on this episode's show page. My thanks to Compiler for their support.
All right, I'll jump back in. And
jump back in.
First off, thanks to a little bit of research from one of our live viewers, Wizardling, and myself. Yes, Hackaday was founded back in 2004 and part of Calcanus's network. And then thankfully, we were spun out as independent before AOL gobbled the rest of that group up. So we escaped that fate. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the future of WordPress. I'm curious the direction it's going. And I see there's a question in kind of our cheat list of questions to ask about Web 3.0. And I'm really curious whether we are going to see a future where WordPress tries to become Web 3.0-ized or not.
I guess I would need to know how you define Web 3.0 before I could answer that.
Isn't that the $1 million question?
Yeah.
Yes.
What's cool is that, here, I'll try to answer that.
Sure.
When WordPress started, there was barely any JavaScript. There was no iPhone. It was like we've surfed a lot of technology changes over the years. And because WordPress is so open, usually when there's something new, one of the first things people do is write WordPress plugins for it. So there are WordPress plugins for all the coolest crypto, Web3, etc. you could imagine. And so, I expect it to be around for decades.
Okay, and so the direction that I was really thinking about that, because I see particularly NFTs as being just a ridiculous flash in the pan that's going to go away. My opinion, I know not everybody agrees with that. But what I do see that's out there right now, and has been percolating for a couple of years now, is the Fediverse. And I honestly believe that probably has more potential than all of the blockchain stuff. But it's probably the same thing. It's probably just people have written plugins for WordPress that make it work with this federated universe and federated login and all of those things. So that's probably already there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's cool.
And so if we were to dig more into this, what do you see as the future of WordPress? Like what's coming? What are the big changes that are coming down the pike?
I've mentioned it a few times already, but I'm really excited about Gutenberg, this block editor, because it allows, the mission of WordPress is to democratize publishing. And the block editor allows people to create not just richer posts with really cool layouts and features, but build entire sites now. With the release of WordPress 5.9 in January, you can now edit your entire site with this block editor. And we want to put the things that you used to need to hire a designer for or a developer or pay for a theme or pay for a plugin to do. We want to make free, easy, and accessible to everyone in the world, literally. When a new WordPress release comes out, it's usually translated into over 50 languages on the release date. So we're really trying to be essentially like the operating system for the open web. And we're on about 43% of all websites so far. I think we could get that to 80 or 85% if we keep listening to our users, iterating, staying open and inclusive, and building community. I don't see any reason it can't become a standard, not unlike Linux or Android. So that's what we're working on. I guess the other thing that's really big and exciting is WooCommerce. So this is actually a plugin owned by Automattic, but it's also GPL. It's built on WordPress, and it sort of you can enable selling digital goods, physical goods, bookings, subscriptions. You can put all sorts of different commerce through WooCommerce. And we're trying to do for commerce what we did for CMSs and blogging with create an open alternative. And the stat we can share is that last year, $31 billion of things were bought through WooCommerce, which was, I think, just about doubling year over year. And that's continuing to go quite fast. So I think it's really great to have an open source alternative to Shopify, BigCommerce, Etsy, etc. Because commerce is, of course, an important part of society.
I did not realize that WooCommerce was a part of the WordPress parent organization. Was that a recent acquisition, or has that always been the case?
We bought WooCommerce in 2015, so it's been about 7 years now, and we rewrote it, we made it scalable, we've done a ton of work on it, and it's come along really nicely. It's really developer focused right now, so maybe it actually would be good for this audience, but we're trying to make it easier with every release.
Very cool. I know for the longest time it was a pain trying to find a good commerce plugin, a good platform that worked well with WordPress, that you didn't have to worry about, the developer abandoning it. It didn't cost an arm and a leg to get into. So that's actually pretty exciting that there's a good choice out there now. And I'm curious also about the block editor. You've mentioned it a couple of times, but I'm not sure I understand exactly what this is. Is it a new text editor, or is it something as big as drag and drop editing of a website?
Both. So it replaces the old editor in WordPress. You can see it if you go to, I think it's wordpress.org/Gutenberg. has a demo and an introduction to it and everything. And so, yeah, it both allows you to write posts. You can use it just for text, or you can create really rich layouts like galleries, maps, contact forms, all sorts of widgets. And you can drag and drop. You can, use. It works on mobile. You can use it on the web. You can edit it with a keyboard. It's highly accessible. Like you can kind of do just about anything you imagine with it. And it's getting more and more capabilities with every single release. So, there you go. You got it on the screen.
Yeah, nice. So one of the things as a hobbyist PHP and JavaScript developer, I have always found it a pain to try to get in and figure out, with every time you go to learn a new language or learn a new platform, there's this wall that you have to break through to really start understanding it. You could also call it the learning curve. And I've always found the learning curve to getting into WordPress under the hood to kind of be a pain. And I'm curious whether Gutenberg is it kind of an attempt to fix that? Because I've heard that from other people too. And I'm curious, is this an attempt to make it easier to get into? You start writing things with WordPress by dragging and dropping, and then can you get in under the hood and configure it further?
You can. And Gutenberg is 100% JavaScript. It talks to the WordPress API, REST API. You can add widgets or create things just with JavaScript, or you can use PHP to create them. And the nice thing is, like, things that you used to need to code for or need a plugin for, you can now do purely in Gutenberg just using core built-in stuff. You don't need to code as much. So people who build websites can do it in a fraction of the time they used to need to. One cool example of that is the whitehouse.gov. So actually, whitehouse.gov switched to WordPress under Trump, but the Biden coming in decided to keep it. We actually host it now too, which is pretty cool. It's on the enterprise VIP service. But it was the first time in presidential history that on the day of the inauguration, they had a brand new website with all of that they developed from scratch, with all their own content, all their own design, everything. And they were able to do that because they built it in Gutenberg.
Yeah, that's very cool. Doc, are you wanting to jump in? I hear you.
Actually, so there's a question that I over here that I'll just ask that I got. How has WordPress thrived independently while giant usage trap platforms seem to rule the world? And that WordPress doesn't seem to be recognized as a giant of its own, yet clearly it is. And you just told us you actually have some pretty large ambitions as well. So how's that work? That's interesting to me too.
WordPress is kind of like the dark matter of the web. It's everywhere, but it's on different domains. So if you're like ranking traffic or just looking at app usage, WordPress.com or Tumblr it'll show up in the top 50, but it's not like one of the top couple. But if you were to add up all the countless millions of domains and add all their traffic together, I think it'd be definitely top 3 or 4 on the web. It's spread out between lots of domains. And another point of WordPress is that you don't always know you're on a WordPress site. You can customize it, make it your own. And so if you're on a Twitter page or a Facebook page, you always know because you're on their domain, you have their design, Medium all looks the same, Substack, etc. But with WordPress, you can really customize it and make it your own, which I think is awesome for users and awesome for the web, but means that we probably have a little less brand awareness than we would otherwise. But that's okay. If you know, you know.
So a second question is tell us about Openverse, because that's one of the things that you've got there. And I'm already like digging into it, and it looks really useful to me because I like to find visuals. What's that about, and where did it come from? And give us a few words on that. And I know Jonathan has a thought after that.
It was a little unusual in that we acquired that from Creative Commons, and then we put it on WordPress.org. So we run it on the kind of the non-profit side of things. So that was a Creative Commons search, which you're very familiar with. It's been around for a long time. The Creative Commons nonprofit, I guess for cost reasons or whatever, was either going to shut it down or get rid of it. And so we got in touch and said, hey, we would love to continue this, hire the team, and make it an open API that's accessible to everyone, and build it into WordPress. So what we're going to do is build in the Creative Commons, Openverse search into WordPress. So you'll be able to have like Creative Commons images available to you with a click, kind of like an open source stock photo library, where you're also going to be able to find video, audio, all sorts of stuff on there. And we're making our own photo directory as well on WordPress.org, where people can submit photos to be actually totally open. So the equivalent of like Creative Commons 0 or GPL, so that they can be used in a super open source fashion. So that just happened a few months ago. We're still working on it. It's still nascent, but I'm excited that this can be part of like the open web forever and ever now.
This is very interesting to me because I've been told, and it may be wrong, but I may have more photos in Wikipedia than anybody, and I put none of them there. Other people did. I have 70-some thousand photos on Flickr that have been there since the mid-aughts, since Flickr started. They're all Creative Commons licensed to require attribution only, and I don't really care, but it lets me see at least where they're showing up. Most of them are taken out the windows of commercial flights because I like to sit at the window and shoot what's on the ground. I just published a thing on my blog. It's a WordPress blog about the site of the Hollywood racetrack as it turned into the SoFi Stadium. Since from 2005 to 2019, just shots flying overhead on approach to LAX, but it's the way that stuff shows up in Wikimedia Commons seems clunky to me. And from what you're saying, this is very interesting. I'd actually love to see what happens when I stop paying Flickr and I want to move all this stuff into something closer to the public domain. Probably Flickr used to have an API that made that somewhat easy. I don't know if they still do or not, but having stuff move into the Openverse as a kind of front end for what Wikimedia Commons does in a nice but not great way would be really cool.
Yeah, I think we're very proud to be alongside Wikimedia, and one of my favorite nonprofits is archive.org. Basically organizations, the Long Now Foundation, they're trying to say like, okay, how do we make this free, open, and accessible for the long term? And that's how I think about WordPress and what I hope WordPress's legacy will be. A theme written for WordPress in 2005 still works today. We've maintained backwards compatibility that long. Permalinks for WordPress. We always put a lot of thought and care into how the URLs worked because we wanted to create things that were truly, honored the permalinks and were permanent, or at least could be. So I always appreciate that. And I'm a real stickler for if I ever find a broken link on any of our services, I'm like, okay, how do we redirect that? How do we update it? How do we make sure it works again?
So I want to go in a slightly different direction, talk about something that is kind of in the, I don't want to say the news because that's not really accurate, but kind of the area of news that we watch at least. And that is this movement, and it's been happening for quite a few years now, away from people hosting their own servers. And this is fascinating because with WordPress, for me, someone that does server hosting, it's so easy to get started, right? Like WordPress for the longest time has had this 5-minute install that you could actually do in faster than 5 minutes because you untar and you deploy a MySQL, a database, a stock database, and you're done. Like you can get it done really fast and really easy. And yet at the same time, there are so few people that are actually like hosting their own stuff. They all turn to other hosts. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, whether there's a future in self-hosting, or is this just never going to be part of the internet again?
Well, so self-hosting is also kind of what people do on the cloud services. Do you mean like literally running the server at your house, or
essentially,
like
yes.
It? Yeah.
Because there's this problem where, and again, we try to avoid politics, but to really get at this, it's, if someone for whatever reason offends whoever is running their hosting, the hosting company has pretty much unlimited power to just kick them off of the service. And for a lot of people, that is a big problem. And one of the solutions that's been bandied about is we should just host yourself. Well, there's bandwidth problems, there's uptime problems, there's security problems with hosting yourself, and so there's this kind of tension between the two ideas.
Yeah, I think that hosting yourself will always be possible, certainly with WordPress, but it comes with a lot of responsibility and maintenance. There's just announced a Linux kernel vulnerability. I run a lot of my own servers. I had one that got hacked with a Log4j vulnerability that came out. I just had a service running. I think it was Unify or something, and so it's a lot of responsibility. So I think that there's good trade-offs of other hosting providers that are very free speech oriented. So there's lots of places you can go. I think you could also do something like a Tor Secret Service, or like there's all sorts of ways, I think, to resist censorship if that is something that is truly affecting you. But I do think that also can be somewhat overblown. Like everyone was talking about how Joe Rogan's being censored, but he still has like millions of viewers, and he's talking about it. And I saw it on Instagram, and so like sometimes the rumors of censorship or the fear of it can be worse than the actual reality of people not being able to find what you're saying or publishing.
Sure. And I guess sort of related to that, do you have any thoughts on the ephemeral nature of what we're putting on WordPress sites and other places? Maybe not intentionally, but there's services closed down, and there's been a lot of blog content that's been lost to the the bit muncher over the years, just because services have closed down and nobody had a backup. Is that something that you guys at WordPress are thinking about?
Totally. That's part of why we run a WordPress host ourselves at WordPress.com, and there's always been a free tier, and hopefully always will be. And part of that is, and same thing on Tumblr. Tumblr has over half a billion blogs, over 500 million. They're all still running. All the content's still there. So I think you have to choose where you trust your data with carefully. And for example, I love Google Photos, and I trust that Google's probably not going to lose my data accidentally, and will probably keep their Photos product running for a long time. And I pay for it, which is also great. I trust things that I pay for more than things I don't. Domains have been around a really long time. That's probably going to be around a lot longer. So you just have to make a decision. And always back up. And have backups for your backups, and test your backups. Yeah.
Yes.
This is in fact one of my big fears. In geology, there's what's called an unconformity, which is here are 5 layers that get you up through the Jurassic, and all of a sudden we're in 10,000 years ago, and what happened in the meantime. And I worry about that we live in a time that, paper may not last forever, but it doesn't disappear when you stop paying your bill. So there's a fear about that, and the ephemeral nature of digital life is interesting to me. We lived in one of my sons said in 2003, we're moving from the static web to the live web. The static web was, we have all this real estate, sites with locations, domains that, that you visited and constructed and built. And he saw it with blogging. He said we were moving to the live web when inevitably he thought that the Google was going to index everything instantly, which they have since then, which obsolesced Technorati, which I helped start, and some other things like that. But I worry about it, for whatever it's worth. I feel reassured by what you just said, but not totally. And I'm not sure it's answerable, but.
In day one, we have a cool feature that lets you print out your journal. It's very popular, and we want to port that feature to our other platforms like Tumblr and WordPress. I think it'd be just a cool option. But I actually believe that with maintenance, data, well-maintained data, or like something on archive.org, will be around longer than anything physical. because we'll migrate it to different mediums. You should probably, since your stuff is openly licensed anyway, like maybe submit it to archive.org. It'll be around until the sun burns out.
Which is a 500 million years, just for those of you keeping track. That's when it burns out photosynthesis, which probably will do the job. But anyway, stay tuned. Who needs photosynthesis? Anyway. Anyhow, so we have more questions, but first I have to let you know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is also brought to you by New Relic. If you're a software engineer, you've been there, it's 9 p.m., you're finally unwinding from work, your phone buzzes with an alert, something's broken, and your mind's already racing at what could be wrong. Is it the back end or the front end? Is it global? Is it the server? Is it the network, the cloud provider? Do we have slow running queries? Did I introduce a bug in my last deploy? Now the whole team's scrambling from tool to tool and messaging person to person and to find out what they can do to fix the issue. According to a new Relic report, only half of all organizations are implementing observability for their networks and systems. The report showed how maintaining network observability continues to be an issue for companies around the world. That won't happen if you get New Relic. New Relic combines 16 different monitoring products that you normally buy separately, so engineering teams can see across their entire software stack in one place. You'll get application monitoring, that's APM, unified monitoring for your apps and microservices, Kubernetes and Pixie, instant Kubernetes observability with Pixie, distributed tracing, see all your traces without management headaches so you can find and fix issues fast, network performance monitoring, stop guessing where performance issues start and ditch data silos for system-wide correlated view, and so much more. More importantly, you can pinpoint issues down to the line of code so you can know exactly why the problem happened and can resolve it quickly. That's why the dev and ops teams at DoorDash, GitHub, Epic Games, and more than 14,000 other companies use New Relic to debug and improve their software. Whether you run a cloud-native startup or a Fortune 500 company, it takes just 5 minutes to set up a New Relic in your environment. The next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does. And you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of free data per month forever. No credit card required. Sign up at newrelic.com/floss. That's NEWRELIC.com/floss. newrelic.com/floss. And now I have to go back to my notes. About the state of open source. So this is a frequent theme on the show, especially with our listeners and constituents, because most of them are developers of one kind or another. In the age of GitHub containers, and I'm just going to read from a note here, and large employers of open source maintainers and code contributors being accused of biasing development for their own purposes. I know when I was an editor for Linux Journal for 24 years. It was probably the most persistent complaint. And I'm not sure none of the alpha maintainers ever said it was a problem, even if they worked for Red Hat or Oracle or whatever it was, that none of those companies are putting their fingers on the scales. But I'm wondering if you could address the issue that most open source alpha developers are working for companies that are in a position to at least conceivably bias the development. And I wonder if you have any insights on that. I'm not getting your audio.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I like to just assume that everyone is biased and just I think transparency is the best answer there, not pretending to be unbiased or worrying too much about it. And open source is inherently extraordinarily transparent. And so I think that's a natural countervailing force to any negative externalities that could come from biases.
Well, another one is, and this is one I've been all over for a long time, which is the surveillance economy and surveillance capitalism. And I'm guessing that a great many of the WordPress websites are for publishers that are making at least some of their money off of cookies being placed and ads being sold and pushed into their spaces. And in fact, I have a blurb on the back of Shoshana Zuboff's book, Surveillance Capitalism, in the Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And I'm wondering if there's anything, are you involved in trying to fight what's the bad acting that's going on there? Because there's a massive world out there that's kind of a four-dimensional shell game that's not visible to the user. In many cases, not visible to the website developer. They're kind of jobbing it out, and the cookies kind of come floating through from third parties. So I'm wondering if you have either a position on that or something you're doing with it, or, what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, browsers have changed quite a bit. So they're a lot more private than before. That mostly has served to strengthen the duopoly of Google and Facebook. I don't think it's actually, so it mostly hurt independent publishers. We just introduced an ad-free browsing upgrade on Tumblr. So for $5 a month or $40 a year, you can turn off ads, which again, every social network is supported by ads, so is Tumblr. But we're trying to create an alternative so that people can choose to not have ads on it, which I think is pretty cool. And it works on the mobile apps as well. I actually think, on the scale of evilness, web advertising is not that bad, especially when you compare it to like what happens when your bank or your ISP or your cell phone provider sells your location data, your traffic browsing, your cable provider. I think the telecoms and these other companies are 100 times worse than anything that you could even technically be done on when you visit a website.
How are the telecoms doing that? I mean, obviously they're in a position, right? They know where you are, especially if you're using a phone, right? But
there's been some good exposés about this. I forget the name of the programs, but there's sort of like data brokers where you could actually buy location data for people. Police could use it to find folks. It's pretty bad. There was some blowback to it, but honestly, I feel like the news stories have moved on because there's so much stuff going on literally every day. But yeah, maybe we could Google it and find what the story was. Or we could DuckDuckGo it.
Yeah. I'm also looking at back channels and our own back channel between each other here. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay. So, the timing is a little weird on this one. So
We're
I'm
being
curious.
Transparent.
Yes.
Go ahead, yeah.
I'm curious about Tumblr. I say this very tongue in cheek. It's the home of angsty teens. Why did WordPress or the WordPress company? Why did it see Tumblr as a good investment? What's the play there?
Tumblr, a good investment. Well, a few things. One, it is mobile first. So 85% of Tumblr usage comes through the apps. They have more daily active users than WordPress has monthly active users. So they have a really, really active user base. I love that it's blogging. I love that it's social. It's really fun to use. It is primarily, it's a much younger audience than the rest of our products. Like I said, 55% 13 to 24. It is the queerest social network. It's 25% LGBT plus. So it's just a fun place on the internet. So when the opportunity came to take it over, I was really excited about it. Now, what we haven't figured out yet is the business model. Tumblr has basically never been profitable. And since we bought it, it's, we knew this going in, but it's been burning a lot of cash, tens of millions of dollars per year. So what we're trying to do is get it to break even so it can be something that's sustainable. And we can say it's going to be around, for the long term. All of Automattic's other businesses are profitable. So that's sort of what's subsidizing Tumblr right now. But I want it to be sustainable on its own.
And then I'm curious, do you anticipate the WordPress code base and the Tumblr backend, the code, eventually converging to where you have a single shared code base? Is that on your roadmap?
Totally. So we're going to switch the back end of Tumblr to WordPress. And then the front end, but the interface won't change for people. So if we do this right, they won't even know what happens. The front end will essentially be a React JavaScript application that talks to the API, which is how WordPress.com works today. And so basically like Tumblr and WordPress.com can be two different JavaScript applications talking to the same API.
Wow, we have covered a lot, and the hour is almost gone. And I'm looking back. I mean, put check marks next to all the questions that we have, but our hour is almost up. And so we always close with four questions. The first is there anything we haven't asked that you'd like us to have asked, or that Shiva or one of your people would have liked us to ask?
Well, I'll just do a little bit callback. I searched for cell phones selling location data, and there's a ton of articles about how they're selling the location data. Things that would have been nice to talk about. It's always fun to catch up with you two. And Doc, I appreciate that you've been sharing and publishing online for so long, and you're still doing it. If there's ever a way that our products can be helpful, please let me know. And in fact, an import from Flickr is something that's been on my mind. Because I have another friend, you might follow him on Flickr, Steve Jurvetson, who posts the coolest photos with the best. He writes like long captions on them, so he's essentially blogging, and so he's been wanting to sort of put all that on a WordPress as well. So we'll work on some sort of import that could bring things over.
That's fantastic. So the next questions are: do you have anything to say about blockchain? That's another control question for our experiment.
Oh. Yeah, I think it's definitely a new thing, humanity, a new feature of humanity. This idea to solve the roving general's problem, to have an immutable record that's shared and protected by an entire world of people working together on it, and maybe the closest thing we have so far to unhackable code. So. Yeah. I'm talking mostly about Bitcoin and Ethereum, but other applications built on top of it I think are neat. Now, does it solve everything? Is it going to change everything? No. Is everything should be on the blockchain? Absolutely not. But you can do we're doing some cool new stuff that's never been done before, which I love.
Wow. So that's another great one. So the last two, what are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
Favorite scripting language? I'm going to say JavaScript, actually, today. PHP is probably what I've written the most code in. And I'm not as good at JavaScript as I am in PHP. But, yeah, I love it. And it's so cool. You can run on the server. You can run in browsers. It's accessible. It's ultra fast. Yeah. And text editor. I write mostly in WordPress, to be honest. I know that's not the answer you were looking for. I was just saying that's
probably mine. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that's where I spend most of my time. Number two would probably be a tie between Simple Notes, which is one of our products, and Day One. Day One's essentially like fully encrypted private blogging, but you can also use it as a notes app really easily, just like Simple Note. And it's, super end-to-end encrypted, just like a password manager or something. So that's nice. I use that for like more private journaling or things. And then for like actually editing code these days, I believe it's called Nova that I use. Yeah. It's a new version of Coda. And it's pretty slick. It's on Mac OS.
Cool. Well, this has been a quick hour. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll have to have you back because there's too much we haven't answered, and the world will have changed a lot in a short time. So thanks a lot, Matt. It's been great having you on the show.
Hey, thank you to you both. I really enjoyed the discussion, and happy to come by anytime.
Great. So, Jonathan, that was awesome.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. WordPress is for the longest time, it's been the 500-pound gorilla in the room full of the various options to run a website on. And of course, there's always been kind of this bit of an issue that, it's blogging first. And so if you're not writing a blogging website, then it's not really the one you want to go with. But that's not necessarily true anymore, and particularly with this new push that they're doing for blocks and this kind of new paradigm for putting together a WordPress website. I could see his goal of taking over another big chunk of the web really coming true. It's pretty interesting to watch. And of course, fun to pick his brain about a bunch of other things. And I'm sure we asked him questions that he didn't anticipate talking about today, but that's part of the fun of the show.
Yeah. And I'm very impressed by the several things. One is that he sort of very quietly, though he's on the show now, ambitious about WordPress becoming the predominant way to get content on the web, and it makes total sense. And I love how below the radar, Automattic and WordPress and everything they're doing are without being a gorilla. I mean, they're big without being a gorilla. I said they may be 500 pounds or maybe 800 pounds or 25,000 pounds, but the gorilla's not in their DNA. Clearly, it's a much gentler approach than that, and it's stayed very consistent with all the things we love about open source for all this time. And he has, I think, probably the best single standing case for the GPL. And I mean, can you be more successful than this using the GPL? I mean, using some other license? It just strikes me as being a great argument.
Yeah, I think it was also really interesting to kind of dig into that idea of the GPL becomes more permissive when you're running it on the web. And I don't know that I'd ever quite thought of it that way.
That's a really good one.
Well for them.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, and it makes sense. I didn't. He's got freedom built in. That's pretty cool. Yeah, so absolutely. We're moving along here time wise. We got a late start, so I'll have to let you know before you get your plug in, because I'll probably miss it. Our next guest, scheduled anyway, these things do change, is because of practice, is Piotrek Kozelinsky, the lead developer at CK Editor, CKEDITOR. So that's coming up next week or soon. So, and we'll see you then. Go ahead, Jonathan, with your plug. I probably did that in reverse order.
All right. Not a problem. I've got two things that I'd like to plug. First off is hackaday.com, which of course is a WordPress site. Again, it's one of those that you wouldn't know it unless you went looking for it. But I run a security column that goes live every Friday morning. Keep an eye out for that. And as Matt alluded to, there is a pretty big story in the Linux kernel that's coming up. So keep an eye there. And then the other thing I want to plug is the Untitled Linux Show. And that is a Club TWiT exclusive. We just recently got our own RSS feed. And if you are a Club TWiT member, you can go subscribe to that. And please do so. We have a good handful of people listening to it, but looking to grow the show. And so check that out as well.
I'm going to move up from a handful to a shovelful to a backhoe full.
Yes.
Some other thing like that. So thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, everybody. This has been FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and we'll see and hear you next week.
Hey, I'm Rod Pyle, editor of Ad Astra Magazine, and each week I'm joined by Tarek Malik, the editor-in-chief over at Space.com, in our new This Week in Space podcast. Every Friday, Tarek and I take a deep dive into the stories that define the new space age. What's NASA up to? When will Americans once again set foot on the moon? And how about those samples from the Perseverance rover? When are those coming home? What the heck has Elon Musk done now? In addition to all the latest and greatest in space exploration, we'll take an occasional look at bits of spaceflight history that you probably never heard of, and all with an eye towards having a good time along the way. Check us out on your favorite podcatcher.